Accessing secure channel. The Agent Files, where aspiring agents rise and masters flourish. Powered by Agent Builder Coaching. Mission initiated. File loading.
Hi there, this is Peter Fan for Agent Builder Coaching, and for the Agent Files, where agents are on a mission. And yes, we do this little wordplay with spies and secret services and what have you. We're actually trying to demystify a lot of the stuff around real estate. So we're continuing our episodes in the aspiring agent section for those people that are interested in a career in real estate but haven't really made a decision whether or not this is truly for them. And this may actually be a part that is important in that whole context, because a lot of people don't think about systems per se when they start thinking about a career in real estate. That they think it may all be in place and the real estate companies are going to do all of this stuff, and which is couldn't be farther from the truth. I mean, in a lot of ways, real estate as a career is your own business, not a job, and also not self-employment, because a lot of the stuff that you work on actually is self-actualized by you. There's not a supervisor or a boss that will tell you, do this, go there, use this piece of paper, use that piece of paper. As a matter of fact, it couldn't be farther from that. Okay, so it's important to understand that that doesn't mean that the work doesn't need to be done. In fact, it needs to get done, but there isn't necessarily somebody telling you what to do, when to do it, how to do it, where to do it, why to do it. Okay, so that then comes back to you. And a lot of that stuff you can actually learn well in advance of getting your real estate license, or at least get a clear understanding about it. Okay. That's why this chapter exists, about standard operating procedures or systematized operating procedures, because a lot of the stuff that we do in this business is actually relatively repetitive. It can be complex, it can be emotional, it can be roller coaster, but it's still semi-repetitive. And the beauty of course, of systems is that now you can kind of use it as a roadmap, a checklist, and what have you. And if you have a clear understanding what that looks like, feels like, acts like, you as an aspiring real estate agent can then determine, hey, is this actually for me or not? So it can be actually quite revealing for a person that is just thinking about a career in real estate as to whether this makes sense. Or, and this may equally be a cool thing to know, is, are there different careers in real estate that actually fit in much better? Because, hey, if you say, hey, I really like photography, videos, okay, maybe that's a career, right, that you focus on and become an independent business person that does videos and floor plans and, I don't know, drone stuff. And you understand what I'm getting at? Oh, and there's other people that say, I don't really necessarily want to be dealing with buyers and sellers all the time. I like the administrative stuff in the background a lot more better. Okay, well, again, systems and operational procedures are absolutely key in all of that part, of course. So, important to understand that, you can learn a lot about understanding what systems are already there and what to apply going forward. And yeah, good systems, of course, obviously also provide some clarity for you for the operation. So if you work in a team, work in an organization, work in a larger context, or if you get personally so busy that you can't necessarily handle all the work anymore, which I, very much hope that you get to that point, then obviously you need to delegate stuff anyway. So you starting to think about, how do I structure, how do I operate things going forward, and think systems in that context, then it becomes much easier to later on delegate all the work, particularly if you've documented everything. And yes, then there's the whole compliance part, of course, right? Because if you build everything with compliance in mind, then compliance is no longer an issue. It's already, so to speak, baked into all of your steps and your procedures. Hope that makes sense. Okay. So what's a SOP? Well, it's basically a documented, repeatable process. And I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite system in the world, which is, and not because I eat there all the time, but because it's one of the best demonstrations of the intent and the successful implementation and execution of systems. And it's simply called McDonald's, right? McDonald's is able to sell billions of dollars worth of food each and every year, basically with teenagers. And why can they do it? Because every part, every aspect, every step, anything that happens inside of that organization is systematized. Right? There is not one thing that just happens. Right? Everything has a manual, everything has a checklist, everything has a validation, verification, and it has accountability processes. Each and every part of everything they do, from sweeping the parking lot to where the wrapping papers are, who does what, when, why, and how, it is all documented. Right? Now, that's may seem rigid, and that's kind of the point, because now everything is predictable. But if you, as a consumer, were to walk into a McDonald's and all of a sudden you ask for a Big Mac and you get a fish fillet, guess what? You're going to be upset. And some part of the system broke down. Right? Well, you don't want to be in that position when you're dealing with real estate, where the stakes are way higher than a burger. Right? Although McDonald's may argue that one. But anyway, that's just a discussion for a totally different day and situation. But just think at your business level of being in real estate, you need to make sure that all the I's are dotted and the T's are crossed, not once in a while, but all the time. There is no room for error, right? 90% is not good enough, particularly when it involves, other people's money, their life, their stress levels, their emotional roller coaster, and I guess to some degree your licensing ability, your ability to sell and list and sell property, and make a decent living out of it. Okay, so using checklists and operating procedures becomes important. A lot of that can be taught, learned, understood prior to. And of course, there's many, many rules, regulations that fit into systems real nicely, right? What do you do with FinTrack? Well, there's a checklist. What do you do with Castle? Well, there's a checklist. And so on and so forth, right? What do you do with strata documentation? How do you get them? Where do you get them? What do you do with them? Right? There's pretty much checklists for everything. And we estimate that there's anywhere between 150 to 200 some odd task roles, activities that go along with each and every listing and each and every sale. They're not quite the same list, but they're similar, of course. But there's two sides of an equation, and the perspective and the way you deal with some of the information that you need on the seller side versus on the buyer side might have a slightly different application, implementation, and use. Okay, so therefore there's multiple views, ways of using a list and operating procedures. Okay. Now again, and we touched on it already. Having checklists, having operating procedures, then gives you the ability to delegate it, right? If you can say, okay, here are the 20 steps that are needed to, I don't know, make sure that the sign is posted on the property on time, every time, and it's, showing the right information, yada, yada, yada. If you have a checklist for that, then you follow the steps. You don't necessarily have to do it anymore, but you can delegate it to somebody else. And frankly, that person doesn't necessarily have to be in office, right? That person could be delegating or could be tasked to do that job from almost anywhere, right? So that's another aspect where you can start thinking about, okay, I can make my operations more effective, more efficient, and actually save some money if I contract things out. Your highest and best use of your time, effort, and energy is always directly with buyers and sellers. Everything else, if you could delegate it, you probably have a pretty decent return on investment on that type of commitment. So again, delegation becomes an important part of that. Okay. Now that doesn't mean a full-time person. You can just have a person for science. You can have a person for photography. You can have a person for I don't know, submitting paperwork to the real estate board. I mean, there's all kinds of roles and responsibilities that you can very easily delegate if you wanted to. Do I advocate for all of it? No, I'm just saying that it's there. Right? And I'm typically not the greatest person with super detailed stuff. So if I need to have super detailed stuff done, I delegate it. Right? Because after the third or the fourth go around on a checklist, I go like, I'm done. Okay. And there's other people that love that stuff. They love following these checklists. Okay, great. Here you go. Okay. So again, those are some of the uses for systems in operational. But one of the key things, and it's already said it with kind of digression towards McDonald's, consistency is such an important part, right? That whatever you set out to do, it happens each and every time that you work with a transaction with a buyer and seller, with referrals with other agents that you deal with, listings, buyers, contracts, paperwork, the deposits, you name it, it's always done the same way. That may become boring, but that's a good thing. Trust me, in real estate, in many businesses like this, is probably good. Okay? Probably good. Provided that whatever it is that you set out to do was well articulated. Yes, and it also, of course, if you have good systems, then bringing on a new person into your system is then teaching to the system, right? Not, well, what is the system in the first place? Well, it's all in my head. Well, that's not really your system. And that's how not in the moment. And that, of course, once you have that in play, once you have it documented, it saves a lot of time and reduces a lot of stress. One of the things I hear actually quite commonly from real estate agents, they say, "Oh, I'm so busy. I have to hire an assistant, but I'm so worried about it because they never do what I want them to do." Okay, did you put down exactly what you want them to do? No, and they're all surprised that I then say, "Well, you're basically are bound to fail because if you have some sort of a magic wand that automatically can transfer all of what you want into the brain power of your assistant, then maybe you can succeed. But if you haven't documented it, if you haven't set it out, then they don't know how to interpret what it is that you exactly want. And they can't guess at it. And even if they guess at it, then categorically they're going to be wrong every time. And that's why you hear so often, well, working with an assistant actually made me slower or less productive. Yeah, that's understandable because there was nothing that the assistant could go by as far as a system. Right? I find this myself from time to time that if I ask one of my assistants to do something and I haven't documented myself, now I leave it up to them. And they can oftentimes figure it out, but it takes much longer to figure that out, right? And then we can document it. And in many cases, that is actually the best procedure because, you have a good assistant that is very detailed focused, then they can figure out some of the steps. But in the beginning, that's really, if you don't know and they don't know, then you're both kind of going at it in the dark, and that's not the way to go. So you need to figure out at least in a very crude and essential way what it is that you want to accomplish. Document that, and then get maybe your assistant to fill in the details, then review it together and go over it 1, 2, 3, 4 more times, and then figure it out and have it completely outlined on paper how to do things properly. Okay. All right. So that gives you some idea about it. So here are some areas of where SOPs come into play. Obviously, listings and working with buyers, transactional steps, all of those are key and important. But the most important one is actually at the bottom here, which is called marketing. Right? Because I hate to tell you, and it always comes down to it in this business, is that if there is no consistency in marketing, there's nothing to worry about listing procedures or buyers procedures or transactional procedures because there won't be any. Right? Nothing happens in this business without first marketing. Right? You have to the consumer needs to know that you're available to do business. So again, that's a process, that's a system. And one of the interesting things about that part is that a lot of that you can not necessarily be aggressive and out front aggressively marketing yourself, but you can start telling the story about you contemplating getting into the business of real estate. You can't promote yourself that you're a realtor and you can't solicit in any way, shape, but you can certainly tell the story, which is definitely marketing, in my humble opinion. It is raising your public awareness, the public awareness of you, right? That you are contemplating to become a real estate professional. And so that story is interesting enough to tell in most cases. In most cases. And people that you already know, like, and trust and have a relationship with would like to hear that. And they actually wish the best for you and will oftentimes, just because you've started to tell the story way before you got a license, that whole top of mind awareness aspect that is important in this business, why you actually market, then that time lapse is much reduced. So it's very much a key part of how you go about doing that. Okay. Now, of course, you got to deal with rules, regulation, compliance, and all that kind of stuff. But marketing is definitely one of those systems. So what do realtors use? What do most professionals in this type of business use? They use a contact relationship management or a client relationship management system. The C, contact with a client, or is kind of used interchangeably. But it's really about relationships, right? And I want you to really kind of understand that part, that everything you'll do in this business going forward is about relationship. Right? If there is no relationship, there is very little chance that you do business with that person. Right? So there needs to be that know, like, and trust. There needs to be the confidence by the consumer saying, thinking, knowing that you've got their back. You're going to look after everything that needs to be looked after in a professional, competent, capable manner, and that you have to support the resources and what have you necessary to make that happen. And when that wanes, when that becomes doubtful, buyers, sellers will find reasons not to do business with you. Sorry, that's just the way it is. Okay, so you having a solid method to get in touch, stay in touch with people is important on their terms. You shoving down new listings every week is not their terms. Right? If you don't understand what it is that your client or what your audience is looking for, then that becomes now your next best priority, is to figure out how you can serve them, how you can benefit them. Okay? Now, other things that people use are Google Sheets, spreadsheets with kind of Gantt list or graphs or what have you. Trello boards is another form of project management where you can build, cards and move activities around or people around along activity lines, and it's a very visual way to create structure and flow into all of your activities. And it can, for some people, that's really very important to have something right in front of them that they can see. Right in the good old bad old days, if people used a whiteboard with all kinds of little squares and they had stickies on. Johnny went from this stage to that stage, and they literally moved stickies around to make sure that everything was done properly. That was before the computer. I'm that old. Sorry. Anyway, now we use AI and Trello, Asana, Monday. There's so many different of these project management tools that do some research on that, and it can be quite helpful. Right? Now, as far as the more administrative and I guess to some degree artistic and creative type organization, things like Canva and Google Docs or Microsoft Office or all of those templates you can use. Many real estate brokerages now offer accounts with these organizations so that you have built-in templates already, but you still got to find your own voice, your own identity in a lot of these things. So that's another aspect to systematize it. What is your brand, right? And how do you represent that? So again, all kinds of ways that systems become part of how you set yourself up and then implement. So common mistakes around SOPs is they're in your head. If they're in your head, they don't count. It's not a system. It may be a system to you, but it's no system to anybody else because they do not know what you mean and will not be able to interpret it. One of the statements you hear so often, I'm hiring an assistant and I say, well, come fix me. Well, that doesn't work. The assistant doesn't know what needs fixing to begin with. And then even if they had an idea, they wouldn't know what specifics they need to fill in to make the fix so that it works for you, right? Because if you resent the fix, then what's the point? You're never going to do it. So there's some harsh, maybe, realities that, if it's in your head, it's not really a system. It may be a routine, but you're going to hit a ceiling very, very quickly. And I say this on a regular basis. It's okay if you have one client and you need to follow one process, but you'll have 15, 20 people that are in different phases and stages of their buying or selling process, and you got to all keep that straight, right? So think about that. So it becomes a mess. It becomes a mumbo jumbo that it becomes very hard to follow through as to who's where at any given point in time. Okay? And then the other part comes in is that then people inevitably start taking shortcuts. Oh, I forgot to get this piece of paper or file that or do this or do that. Well, that comes back to haunt you, right? So things like compliance then gets often forgotten. Disclosures are not signed. Pieces of paper that should be in the file are ignored or forgotten or what have you, right? Times, dates, all the important parts of making sure that the deal is secure and safe sometimes get jeopardized just because, oops, I forgot. Right? When you say, oops, I forgot, that basically means I have no systems, right? You got that, right? And then, there's definitely a risk of overcomplicating processes, particularly with brand new agents, but sometimes even with very experienced agents. There's a bit of a tendency to always chase this shiny object, this hey, what I'm doing today is okay, but I see Johnny over there doing this, and I think I want that. I think I need to do that. Or there's some new piece of technology, and just the implementation of the new piece of technology takes forever in order to truly emerge into your model. So think about that very, very carefully. And I've touched on this before. If your business is running very, very, very smooth operationally, and it starts to feel like boring and you're an autopilot, you're probably doing a lot of things right. Right now, so if you want to throw, a spanner in the mix, then be very, very careful. I don't know whether you're old enough to remember this, but Coca-Cola some time ago, made the decision that they were going to change their recipe to their core brand. And it cost them billions of dollars to fix it. Right? The loss of market share, the loss of revenue, the loss of reputation, and how dare they mix with the favorite brand. It was a very, very, very expensive lesson. So if you have something that works and it is working really well with the people that you are serving, to change that can be very expensive. So be very cautious. And, there's a reason why people say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's tempting sometimes, but it's not always the right move. Okay, so here's an example of an SOP, and I'm going to say something here that it's not actually there. That before you actually start signing those documents, there's probably another 15, 20 steps that happen before that, right? Because how are you going to take a listing without doing research about it, right? The site plan, floor plan, zoning, municipal records. If it is a strata, what's about the strata documentation? What about the title documentation? Is there any fire code or other code violations? What is the upside on the property? What's the downside of the property? What's the overall condition? What's the pricing? All of these bits and pieces take time to ascertain and to check and verify to make sure that whatever it is that you're putting together for this listing is based on facts, not wishful thinking. Right? The seller may have an opinion and a thought and a feeling, but you have to work your operations based on facts. You can't do wishful thinking. And oftentimes when people start making assumptions about certain things, that you find yourself later on having to retract that or fix it because it wasn't quite the way you thought it was. Right? It's understandable, don't get me wrong, but it will always come back to haunt you, right? So work performed without a building permit, and you didn't find out because you didn't check whether or not there was a building permit. Yes, there's an issue that there's work performed without a building permit. The bigger issue for you is that you didn't check. Right? That goes directly to your duty to care and the responsibility to make sure that you check. Right? So there's two issues. Yeah, all of this work is done without a permit and therefore may be illegal, and we call it the material latent defect. But you not checking is directly on you. And your seller will look at you as being responsible for it. But a potential buyer will also look at any damages to you and say, hang on, right? Yeah, there's the material latent defect, but this guy, this realtor or this gal realtor should have checked, is responsible to check, and they didn't, and they therefore didn't disclose what was required to be disclosed. And by the way, that goes for both the buyer's agent as well as the seller's agent. Okay? So just because you're on the buyer side of things doesn't mean that because the listing agent didn't check that you didn't have a responsibility to check as well. So you understand that every part of this business has steps and processes, and every single one of them needs to be looked at and dealt with. And if I sound like I'm trying to scare you, that's not the point. You are at the very fortunate position and opportunity now to understand and get some insight into these things before you get licensed, so you can familiarize yourself with these things, prepare yourself with these things, and not be overwhelmed by the time that you do get your license. Okay, so this is not about scaring. In fact, the opposite. This is really making you fully aware as to what you're getting into, and then realizing that you can learn a lot of this stuff now. Right? This doesn't take a real estate license to kind of get a general grasp of some of the steps that take place in real estate. And by the way, very little of this is in the course. Very little of this. It says you have to act in a competent manner, and you're supposed to know everything that goes on. Well, but what that actually means isn't really touched on. They don't really talk about Castle. They don't talk about Privacy Act. They don't talk about, a lot of the structural things around property. I think there may still be one chapter about actual houses in the real estate course, right? So, yeah, they talk about do some research, and there's on the BCFSA website, there's some direction as to what that means. And hopefully you'll find the time and the space to actually find that and look into that before or after you get licensed. Okay. So, okay, now you are at the negotiating table or at the listing table. And yes, there are a whole pile of papers to sign, the disclosures and the listing agreement and the data entry forms and title searches, and you name it. And yeah, you're going to order some photos and get the paperwork uploaded to the MLS system, add some postings, do some advertising, keep your client informed, keep the records, make sure that the office gets all the paperwork, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, that's, again, another phase of all of those SOPs. Okay? It's a good phase, by the way. Okay? We still think that listings are a good thing. So think about the two opposites, right? If you work without SOPs, then it's very easy to miss deadlines, particularly if you get busy, right? Because you literally don't know, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing after a while. So, and obviously, if everything is documented and is operated with checklists and SOPs, then you can find stuff and you can track stuff, and whether it's all digitally or whether it's physical files. I still have a tendency actually to do both, right? To have paper files and have digital files, and try to make sure that when I'm in the field that I actually have a set of paper files with me, because it's just that much easier to keep notes on them. But that's just old-fashioned me. There's definitely realtors that are all digital. And there's nothing wrong with it. I'm probably about 85-90% digital. But there's still bits and pieces that I definitely do on paper. Will we ever go 100% digital? Don't know. Maybe. Don't know, actually. We see a little bit of a retracting of that, a little bit of people saying, all of this digital stuff is great, but, to have an actual site plan and an actual larger scale and larger perspective in front of me is helpful, is beneficial. So we see a little bit of both. But will there be more technology? Absolutely. Holography, 3D stuff, virtual reality, virtual staging, instant kind of redecorating houses, redesigning floor plans. All of that will take place in the not so distant future. We already have, the amount of paperwork that I now have access to literally at my fingertip digitally, compared to what the steps that we had to go through 25, 30, 35 years ago, is just astronomical. Right? It's so much I can get without ever leaving my desk that I actually couldn't even get to on the road. Right? You literally had to go through so many different offices and departments to get anywhere. Now, more stipulations and restrictions on it just to protect people's privacy. But, once you get past that process, and again, it's a system, access to accurate and complete information has become much more doable. And, it's much more our responsibility, right? So, again, discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. And so you having systems, you having a roadmap, having checklist is really that bridge, right? And you applying, whatever is on your checklist, whatever is in your standard procedure, oftentimes will keep you way safer and definitely way more on purpose and on point. And therefore, the likelihood, the probability that actually the almost assumed result will be that you accomplish a whole lot more. It's very, very odd that if you follow every step that there needs to be taken in order to make this all work, not succeeding is very rare. So you follow the roadmap, you're pretty much going to get wherever it is that you set out to go. And with that, I hope that this was an informative session. I hope that you got something out of it, because it is a bit of an undervalued part of this business. There's many, many realtors that jump into this business completely unprepared for the sheer volume of stuff flying at them right from the word go. And if you think about it in compartmentalized areas and sections, systems, right, you're going to find it much easier to flow through each of the steps and parts of the day-to-day operation of the business. And with that, we'll find a much easier path to follow. You don't have to know it all. You don't have to do it all. But where it is necessary to figure in and fill in your checklist, your systems, will get you a long way on the road. And again, a lot of that you can prepare for now. So again, I hope that you enjoyed this. All the best. Looking forward to hearing from you with any kind of feedback or thoughts. And looking forward to seeing you on the next episode. So all the best. Have a fantastic week. Take care.
File saved. The Agent Files. For more missions, agents' tools, and tactical strategies, subscribe and follow the Agent Files, powered by Agent Builder Coaching. Until next time, stay sharp. Your next mission awaits.